everybody. My name is Vikas Fonsa, and I'm a product manager, and I work in the application security area. Recently, distributed denial of service attacks or DDoS attacks have been in the news a lot. So I wanted to create a little presentation to explain what distributed denial of service or DDoS attacks are. I will try to keep this as non-technical as possible. So let's get started. Before we get into the DDoS attacks or DDoS attacks, we should try to understand the DOS, the DOS part of these attacks, which stands for denial of service. So as the name suggests, these attacks are designed to disrupt your website or your other systems such as email, file system, etc., so that the legitimate real users of your website or service cannot use it anymore. And attackers achieve this by overwhelming your system with a high volume of requests. But there are other means to achieve this also. For example, they can install malware and disrupt your servers. They can hack into your servers directly and bring those servers down. And there are many other means to do that. Recently, hackers have been installing something called ransomware, which encrypts all your data, and they will not decrypt that data till you pay them a certain amount of money. And so there are many different ways to achieve denial of service. Basically, this will just disrupt your regular business or your regular website. And needless to say, this will lead to loss of business if you run an e-commerce website or if you're a bank. If you're Netflix or Twitter of the world and your users cannot use your website or your service, this is going to have a serious impact on your business. Let's now move on to the distributed denial of service attacks or DDoS attacks. So these are very specific kind of denial of service attacks in which the attackers use hundreds or thousands of computers that they control to send a very high volume of requests to your website or your system. So they basically try to overwhelm your systems with these malicious requests. And more recently, the Internet of Thing devices. So Internet of Thing devices are things that you don't typically consider as computers. For example, cameras or refrigerators or lamps. All these devices are the newer version of these devices are now getting connected to the internet. And recently, we have seen very large attacks being mounted that leveraged these devices. And there are, of course, millions and millions of computers and these devices out there in the world. And all of those are getting leveraged to send these like floods of malicious requests to your websites or your systems. And basically, there are many different variations of these attacks, and I will cover some of those in a later slide. But think about it as somebody sending a huge flood of requests to your website, or somebody sending a huge volume of connection requests to your servers. Of course, these are malicious requests, so these are not real users trying to use your service or real systems trying to connect to your servers. These are malicious, but what ends up happening is that your servers, your websites, the underlying resources are overwhelmed, and your website becomes either unavailable or your legitimate users experience a very severe loss of performance, and basically, your business is disrupted. What also happens is that sometimes these attacks are mounted, um, and your internal technical resources will be overwhelmed trying to handle these attacks, and in parallel, the hackers will try to attack other underlying vulnerabilities in your systems while you're trying to handle this extreme overload of your systems. And we have seen hundreds of gigabits of attack data and tens of millions of connections per second being leveraged in these attacks. And the more recent attack that was mounted against the Dyn DDoS system apparently was around 1.2 terabits per second. So that is huge. So talking about the Dyn DDoS attack that was mounted last week, it's it. So Dyn is a company that manages DNS, that offers DNS services. So DNS is the directory system of the internet. So in your browser, when you type a website's address, for example, www.cnn.com, that address is in turn translated by the DNS system into a number called the IP address of that website's server. And that IP address is in fact used to establish connection to the website, and then send the requests back and forth. If the translation from that address to the number fails, then you will be unable to access that website. And DNS system is the system that does this translation. So effectively what happened in this case, Dyn, which manages the DNS records for a lot of popular websites, apparently including Netflix and Twitter and a bunch of other popular websites, DNS servers of Dyn were attacked. So they were unable to serve the DNS records, and the translation from web address to the IP address, that number was failing, and so users were not able to access this website. And that basically, in a nutshell, was the DDoS attack that was mounted. Now, what makes these attacks even more worrisome is that they are extremely cheap to mount. So Verizon publishes a security report every year, and Verizon mentioned that you can rent a system of hacked computers or automated computers called bots for as little as $10 an hour. And Kaspersky Labs published a report which says that business impact of a single incident of distributed denial of service could range anywhere from $52,000 to $400,000. So as you can see, the cost to mount an attack could be as little as $10 an hour, and the resulting business impact is huge. So this is a serious problem. Okay, moving on. What the business world or the IT world started seeing last year are these ransom notes. So there was a group called Armada Collective. I believe it's still operational. They were starting around last holiday season. They were sending these emails, these ransom notes to businesses, and saying that, hey, we are about to DDoS your site, and they will provide an IP address in this email, and pay us like 20 bitcoins, or sometimes it was more than 20. But basically, this is a ransom note, and so basically, hackers have been trying to, other than just like causing havoc and disrupting websites, they have been trying to monetize these attacks also. And in some cases, companies have been forced to pay. In other cases, they were able to manage or handle the attack. Of course, this says these emails give a date and time when they are going to mount this attack. But these guys are smart. They will almost never mount the attack on the day and day or the time that they mention in these ransom notes. So they will try to catch you off guard and mount it at some other day. So basically, hackers have been trying to extort money using the threat of DDoS attacks also. Okay, moving on. What can you do? Basically, because of some flaws in the underlying architecture of the internet, and because of the ease with which these attacks can be mounted, if you have a public website or your systems are exposed publicly, then you can pretty much assume that a DDoS attack is going to happen to you. It's not a matter of if it will happen, it's just a matter of when it will happen. So you should anticipate that and prepare in advance. Some of the things that you can do, as I previously mentioned, the goal of these DDoS attacks is to send a huge volume of traffic. So the more capacity that you have to handle the traffic, the better it is. Of course, no given customer will be able to, have enough capacity to handle the very large DDoS attacks that are kind of mounted these days. So recommendation is to leverage some kind of cloud-based DDoS service. So these cloud-based DDoS prevention services have a lot more capacity to handle attacks than you can have in your own data center. There are services out there called Content Delivery Network. They also have huge capacities out there, and some of those have DDoS prevention services built into their infrastructure. And so you should leverage a cloud-based DDoS prevention service. And I'm going to talk about some vendors that are in this business later on. The reason I say cloud-based, as I mentioned, there are appliances or computer on-premise appliances that you can install in your own data center, but you will have to spend a lot of money to scale those appliances to handle the high volume that these latest DDoS attacks are mounting. And also a lot of companies are moving their IT infrastructure to cloud service providers such as Amazon, AWS, Microsoft Azure, or Google Cloud. Make sure you ask the right questions and make sure that these cloud service providers can handle DDoS attacks, because now your website is all hosted in the cloud, and if the cloud infrastructure gets DDoSed, then all the customers in a given data center might get impacted, and that could include you. And also think in terms of multi-layered security. So it's a common thing in application security world that no single security measure or security tool will be sufficient to handle all these kind of attack vectors that are out there. So in addition to DDoS protection, you might need additional measures such as a web application firewall, intrusion prevention systems, intrusion detection systems, network level firewalls. Also think in terms of multi-layered security. And of course, test. You should be able to test these systems in advance to make sure these can handle the systems can handle the high volume of attack traffic that will come. Finally, do business continuity planning and disaster recovery. Do failover testing to make sure that if a given part of your business is attacked, or a given data center is attacked, you're able to move your traffic to a different geographical location, or you're able to fail over to a system so that while this attack is underway, you are able to continue your business and don't suffer a severe loss. Okay, so move on. This is a little bit more technical part of it. It's not possible to cover all the different kinds of DDoS attacks that are getting mounted out there, but I will cover a couple of these, and hopefully these will set the stage for you to go out and do further research or study of your own. So there are like two major kind of attacks that are getting mounted out there. Again, as I said, I'm just scratching the surface here, but these are simple enough to understand and severe enough for you to know about. So one is what's known as HTTP flood, also known as application layer DDoS attack or layer 7 DDoS attack. Those are a little bit more technical terms. I'm not going to go into the details of those. But basically, like think about these as regular requests coming to your website. It's just that the attackers are going to leverage a bunch of computers and send a flood of these requests to your websites. So botnets, I use the term botnet here. So botnets are huge farms or huge collection of these computers that these hackers control. So they have the ability to send requests, huge floods of these requests, which look like requests coming from regular browsers or regular users using your website, with certain caveats, of course, because regular users will never send requests at such a high volume. So botnets can be used to send these requests, and when these attacks are mounted, your users, regular users, your legitimate users, will not be able to use your website, or the performance or the services will be severely impacted. What can you do about it? As I previously mentioned, access capacity and using cloud-based system helps a lot. Other mechanisms are some kind of rate limiting capabilities. So you should audit your systems and your website to figure out the average load that you see during a given business day or a given business week on your website, so that you know that if the load on your website or the volume of requests has gone up many folds, and there is no flash sale or no holiday sale going on, then those might be systems of a website. In that case, you should have the ability to limit the volume of requests that are getting to your website. And and you should come up with meaningful rate limits for your website in advance, so that when DDoS attacks are mounted, those rate limiting systems can drop a bunch of malicious requests to keep your website operational. Monitoring with fast action is of course a part of it. So if you have the ability to engage your IT staff, create a monitoring system so that you can get alerted when these attacks are mounted. And the second type I'm going to mention is SYN flood. So SYN flood is just one variety of DDoS attacks that are mounted at a lower level, at the network level. So basically what happens is that before your computer talks to a given website, let's say www.cnn.com, your browser tries to establish what is known as a TCP connection with the server. And this little picture on the right side shows what happens as part of the TCP handshake process. So there is a message which is known as SYN, which your browser or your client computer will send to the server. Then the server sends back a message which includes a SYN and an ACK. And then your computer sends back an ACK message to the server. And at this point, the connection is established and further communication can happen. In these attacks, what the attackers do is that, so this first SYN message basically is trying to convey the intent to initiate a conversation with the server, right? What they will do is they will send millions and millions of these SYN requests, but then they just stop, right? Their goal is not to establish a connection. Every time a SYN message comes to the server has to engage a little bit of processing power, a little bit of memory to handle this connection, because it is expecting the client to finish this handshake and establish a connection, right? But the client is just going to send a SYN message and then disappear. Another SYN message and disappear. So the goal here is that the server gets so many SYN messages and so many of its hardware and software resources are engaged in handling these that it gets overwhelmed and it cannot serve your regular users anymore. And hackers don't even need to have legitimate IP addresses on the client side to mount these attacks. So they can use spoofed IP addresses, very easy to mount these attacks. And SYN flood is an extremely popular form of DDoS attack vector, because it's, as I mentioned, it's so easy to mount this, so cheap to mount this. Probably one of the most popular form of network level DDoS attacks out there. There are, of course, many other variations. So the measures in terms of mitigation or prevention is extra bandwidth and connection capabilities. So the bigger the pipes that you have and the bigger your servers, the more is your ability to handle these attacks. Of course, very hard to build all that capacity in your own data centers. So it's recommended to leverage cloud-based services or content delivery networks in this case. And plus, there are DDoS mitigation services and products very specifically designed to mitigate DDoS attacks out there. And you should try to leverage those and prepare in advance. And as I said, there are many other kinds. So TCP is a network protocol. There are other protocols, UDP, ICMP, DNS. And so floods of all of these different kind of protocol messages can be used to mount these DDoS attacks. And sometimes a combination of these is used. I don't have enough information at this point to conclude what kind of flood was mounted against the Dyn servers to disable its DNS servers that resulted in download for Twitter and Netflix and others. But it's possible that it's one of these floods. And mitigation measures are very similar to SYN floods. The DDoS mitigation services that are out there are able to handle all these different kind of DDoS attack vectors. Okay. All right. So finally, I looked up on the internet, and here's a list of some vendors that offer anti-DDoS services. You can look them up. You can engage with them. Some of these are primarily on-premise products, but everybody is now trying to move into the cloud business. So you can engage with one of these vendors, look them up. There are analyst reports published. I'm not going to recommend any of these. You can do the analysis yourself, but it's a very good idea to engage with one of these vendors and have a DDoS mitigation service in place, because it's just a matter of of when you are going to get attacked. All right, so that concludes my presentation. Hopefully this was helpful, and I will see you again with some other little presentation in future. Thank you very much.